Piacere, thank you. Ah, so you can use this one. Okay. Yeah, and I think it should be working. Let's see. How's the sound? No? Let's see if we press this.
Okay.
And now?
Yes,
and
now
me?
it's working.
Okay, great. So, welcome.
Thank you.
I want to start by asking you, because, you know, we work in a very visual medium. I work as a presenter, and these images very recently of the NGO boat, Sea-Watch. And last year, we had Aquarius. When you see these boats, and I'm sure our audience members will remember the images of these NGO boats going around and around the Mediterranean with so many people, or the Aquarius 600 Libyan migrants on board, what goes through your mind?
There are many things that come to my mind. Some I can repeat and I can say, other I maybe better not, because of course neutrality should always be the polar star of our action. But of course, what I see is a huge threat to the humanitarian action. This is something that I couldn't imagine could ever happen in the Mediterranean, according to our history, to our tradition, to our cultural background. Watching these images has been really shocking. And maybe you know that I've been very vocal because saving life at sea could never be considered a crime. This criminalization of the humanitarian aid in the Mediterranean is something that I think it will be maybe the worst legacy of this era for the future generation, because in the recent years, our children, our young people, the young generation have been fed with this image and with politicians that are supporting this criminalization of the humanitarian aid.
And why does it happen? Because why? I mean, this is maybe a question for another time, but even the captain was arrested. But why does this happen? Why do they go around and around? Why is there no agreement at sea? Later we'll talk about land, but at sea.
No, legally talking, because there have been this new policy in Italy at that very moment, which I think is completely wrong. And for two reasons. First, because Italy is a country that has signed the Geneva Convention, so it's not only a moral obligation, as it should be, but it's also a legal obligation for a country that has signed the Geneva Convention for the refugees to protect and to process the request and to verify if they met the condition or not to be eligible as refugees or in need of humanitarian protection. The second point, which is even worse than this, is considering Libya as a safe port. And this is another aspect. And if you add this with the recent discovery of one of your colleagues, very brilliant one in Italy, that has discovered the connection between the Libyan Coast Guard, the trafficker, and the Italian government in 2017, and the deal that was made at that time was made with the trafficker. This is something that is a shame for.
Repeat, just to be clear, the deal, traffickers.
At that time, officially, there was this deal. The Italian government provided the vessels to the Libyan Coast Guard. But then, investigating, they have discovered that one of these, the member of the delegation, the Libyan delegation that came to Italy to negotiate this deal, this agreement, is a trafficker, considered trafficked by the UN and the international community. They have been object by several warranties for trafficking human beings.
Incredible.
So you don't have any reliable actor in this moment in Libya. This is not a fault of there are no authorities. This is a matter of fact that unfortunately in Libya the situation is very volatile.
But they are doing this a lot. They seem to be, there's this image that they're outsourcing, they're working with the Libyan Coast Guard, the EU, and they are patrolling, and they are sending
migrants back to Libya, and the reports of Francesco, I mean, I'm sure maybe you visited as well. I don't know what word to use. Are they detention camps or
torture camp, maybe sometimes you can call his way.
Yeah.
Too. So, and this is the aspect related to not to be a safe place for sending back those.
But the
who are
EU
fleeing
is
them.
doing this. They're sending them
Yes, this
back.
is what I'm just saying. That this is
Where is the
unacceptable.
outrage?
They closed the Operation Sophia. They closed all the operations that were patrolling the Mediterranean to save lives from those. And instead of seeking peace, instead of seeking better conditions for the migrants, instead for forcing the Libyan authorities, on which we are dealing about gas, about energy, about several aspects of trade in economical trade. No, instead of doing this, the EU and the Italian government should have done this, dealing for the human rights, dealing for the sign the Geneva Convention, respecting the refugees, improving the quality and assessing the reality. Because there is another aspect that is not mentioned, looking at this route coming from Libya. Because it's a fake news, more or less, because it's true. Now the number has decreased, but this is not because they are patrolling, but this is because in 2017 and 2016, there was a concrete action in Niger that was on the transit, one of the transit country, the country that have been used by the migrants to reach Libya, and fixing this in Niger, the number has decreased. So this is also the reason why the number of migrants trying to reach and to use the Mediterranean route has decreased. It's not because there is the Libyan Coast Guard has increased its own role.
Okay, but one thing, there seems to be a lack of, I don't know if it's awareness or outrage about what is happening in Libya, and you call them torture camps. The previous UN human rights chief, Zaid Rad al-Hussein, he called them, yes, an outrage to the conscience of humanity. He said UN monitors who went there were shocked by what they witnessed. Thousands of emaciated and traumatized men and women and children piled on top of each other, locked up in hangars with no access to the most basic of necessities and stripped of their human dignity. All this to protect Europe's borders. Are we turning a blind eye?
You know, I wonder, in several occasions I've asked to myself, because this is something, migration is not an easy issue, it's a very complex one. And what, unfortunately, Europe and the EU in particular have shown in the recent year is the failure to work as a whole. There are different sensibilities, different policies, and so far, after so many years, only a lot of words but no concrete facts to work as a whole, especially in fixing the cause of migration. And this is one of the aspects. As I use always this story because I think that can explain better than anyone else. I started to be a volunteer in 1988. At the time, we were receiving refugees escaping from Ethiopia. After 30 years, we are still receiving refugees coming from Horn of Africa, not from Ethiopia anymore, but from Eritrea. At that time, there was one great Ethiopia, which was under the dictatorship of Mengistu. And after 30 years, it has not been fixed in Eritrea, in Somalia, and this is this lack of ability of the EU and the international community to fix the causes of migration.
It just seems incredible that they can't agree. It really is frustrating. And you're Italian, I'm Spanish. It is something that both our countries, for years, I mean, migrants arrived, I hate to use this word, drowned, washed up on the shores of Spain, in Italy, and it hasn't changed. But why can't the EU agree? I mean, surely there was something called the Compact, the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration. 152 countries signed that.
Because it's only, in my opinion, it's only European Union by name. So here we are dealing with several countries and everyone dealing with its own policies, its own cultural background, different approaches, and till the moment the European Union will be able to really act as a whole. Now look how big is the number of people moving from Syria, and how many, you mentioned some of them, of course, they wanted to reach Europe and they were stuck here in Turkey or Lebanon, in Jordan, and how the EU is the big absent in the political dynamic in Syria, in the discussion, in all the political discussion. It's a spectator. It's not able to have a foreign policy to deal with the causes of the migration or the refugee crisis or the several refugee crises. And this is something until that moment that they will realize that only as a whole, using their economical and cultural and intellectual ability to work as a whole, till that moment the weight of the EU will be nothing. So Italy, Spain, France, Germany, or Hungary, everyone will have his own policy.
It's incredible you say that they're spectators and that they're only
It's
EU
true.
by name.
Tell me a moment on which during this 9-year war, EU has been a concrete actor on the ground, making the difference in the life of people, improving the level of the political discussion to fix the causes of this huge crisis that Syria is living. Never.
And something that really shocked me is, you know, a lot of people look at Donald Trump, they criticize him for wanting to build a wall, but Europe has built so many walls. I have the number here. Since the start of Europe's migrant crisis in 2015, at least 1,000 kilometers of fences have been erected by Austria, Bulgaria, Greece, Hungary, Macedonia, and Slovenia. And that is 40% of the wall that Trump wants to build. So I was shocked at seeing this.
To be honest, I'm not naive. I think that every country has the right to protect its border, and this is fair enough. There is nothing to add to this point. The reason of concern about the limits of the politics of the wall, is about that desperation will always force these people to identify other solutions. While in Italy, you mentioned the issue about the vessel of Médecins Sans Frontières, of the other NGOs stuck in the Mediterranean Sea, tens and tens of little boats with 15, 20 people were arriving in Italy with this spontaneous arrival, not through the NGOs. So the desperation will always make those who are fleeing more creative, or the smuggler even more smart and cynical than they are. So but this has happened also here in Turkey, of course. The vast number of refugees were here stuck after the EU-Turkey deal, but some of them they use other routes to reach Europe. So when they have the one goal, they will reach it. Of course, you can
determination is everything.
Yes, this determination added with desperation, I would say. Yeah. So the issue is to fix the cause.
Absolutely, and you mentioned Turkey and that EU deal. What do you think, first of all, that Turkey has received the recognition it deserves for hosting so many, the biggest amount of refugees in the world?
Yeah, but you see, now the Europe is paying back the price because they wanted to externalize the border. They talked that at that moment it would be the perfect solution not to think about the crisis, but now this is turning back because the President Erdogan said, if you don't support me, I will reopen the border. So this always show once again the lack of vision. Instead of dealing at that time with Turkey and the Turkey government about how to better distribute, how we can work together, they only thought to externalize the border. Since then I was against that deal because I thought that was not fair. You left one country with the burden of more or less 4 million refugees. They did a great job. Turkish Red Crescent did a great job together with the Turkish government, but of course 4 million is a huge number.
And now the situation...
The miracle here is that they have not changed the political dynamic. Look what has happened with maybe 900,000, 1 million in Germany. How they have changed the political dynamic in Germany or in Italy. This is...
Matteo Salvini has gone. Are you happy about that?
No, I don't talk about politics because I don't think that...
Or his attitude.
Salvini is the epiphenomena, I don't know how to call it, the last image of a culture of fear, of anger, and frustration. So what I think that is wrong in that approach with the issue of migration, I've been very, very clear, is the lack of solution, is the absence of commitment to deal with the complexity. If you want to be a political leader at European Union level, you have to deal with complexity. This is a not easy task.
And how do solutions, I can't, there must be so hard to find, but one thing, the narrative that seems to be so strong, I was born and raised in the UK, and very recently that narrative of an invasion. Does that change things? If we could change
this is about, exactly, but this is about the toxic narrative that has accompanied this phenomena since the beginning. Something that you can fight it because we have a lot of good experiences working with brilliant mayors or municipalities that they wanted to find solution together with the humanitarian actor on the ground, and we were able to identify solution for inclusion. If you think about close to Turin, in Settimo Torinese, is a little village, more or less 35,000 inhabitants. In 3 years, they have passed through our center, Italian Red Cross Center, more than 70,000 people in need of protection, and without any accident, a lot of inclusion, job opportunities. So it's, of course, you do need local politics to work with you. So at local level can make the difference in creating inclusion.
And tell me about
in fighting also the fear, because when you meet with something unknown, when you meet the unknown, it always creates fear. And you did good in mentioning at the beginning the story, because we are talking about numbers: 4 million in Turkey, 1 million in Germany, 700,000 in Italy. But here we have 4 million of fathers, mothers, families, their story, their roots, what they have left, their aspiration, what they have been. So this is about human beings, and it's giving them back the dignity of being treated as human beings, changing the narrative. This is very helpful. And at local level, when you find good politicians and good leader of the local community, this is possible.
So at local level, that is...
Local level is the key, to work at local level, yes.
And so when you hear the new European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, saying that the bloc must develop a new way of burden sharing, so there'll be change at the top of the EU, does that give you hope?
Yes, let's be full of hope, but we have heard this before, so this is, even Juncker told in several occasions, so this is... let's see what is. There are good signals of improvements about the dialogue, not about facts. Let's see what is going to happen. But about shared burden, I think that more than this, that of course it is extremely important, it is once for all to work also to fix the causes of migration. Because we have to fight this rhetorical approach about we have to support them in their own countries. Yes, it's true. And also the humanitarian think the same. Everyone, no one wants to leave his own house, his own family, and but we have to work on it.
But how do you?
And now many African countries are exploited, and are not. There is not a peer-to-peer discussion about how to fix. We Western countries, we look at The African one as a place where we can exploit as much as possible about natural, in terms of opportunities and natural resources. I mentioned Libya. So Libya, the run is about gas and oil. It's not about the dignity of the human beings. That's all. It's the perfect example, I think, in this moment, what is happening on the ground.
It really is incredible. And I want to ask you something. Last year you were here and you mentioned something about the terminology, that it was being called the migrant crisis. And you said, no, it is a phenomenon.
Yeah.
Explain.
Because it's to deal with a crisis, it's a message that you are sending that is something extraordinary. But looking at the reality, this is something that has always existed. Maybe in some moment there are some acute phase on which the number, but because maybe a conflict like happened in Syria or in Libya now. But if you look at the recent history, this is a phenomenon. You cannot call a crisis something that from the Horn of Africa started in 1988 until now many are coming from Eritrea and Somalia. Something is not working. So you have to deal with causes, you have to be prepared. It's not something new, it's something that you have to be prepared for. Dealing with crisis is always asking to the communities, to your own civil society to deal like it's like an earthquake, a flood, which is not. This is something completely predictable, and this is one of the inability of our leaders at the moment, unfortunately.
It's incredible, the frustration that you must feel. And I want to ask you, do you sit with some of these political leaders? I know you don't want to speak about politics, but just the Viktor Orbáns, obviously he was no longer there, but people who are there, that are receiving the migrants, the refugees, Prime Minister of Spain, of Italy, and the ones that are putting up those borders, the Viktor Orbáns of Europe.
Look, when you deal with, especially with those who are more nationalistic, I would say, or populistic, they answer, but this is what my country is asking. This is not me. I would be more supportive, but look, this is the political situation. Forgetting that they are the ones often that they are feeding this fear and anger, not pointing the finger to the migrants as the cause of the problems that the country is living, which is, of course, something that is not true. What we are trying is to persuade, to work step by step on this in terms of acceptance, because what is at risk, especially you mentioned some of the countries in which we are feeling that our work is more at risk, it's about accepting even the simple presence of the humanitarian actor.
Which countries?
I don't want to go in deep, but this is one of the issues that we are living. And this is something very delicate when it starts to happen, and considering
they won't allow
a crime,
humanitarian aid?
the support about basic needs to the migrants. No, this is a matter of fact. No, you can arrest the captain of a vessel or those who are providing food. Look what has been happened even in US. That there are people that now is under trial because they provided food and water in Texas to those who have reached the US, and they were providing basic support to survive. We're talking about empathy, talking about having a heart, not about smuggling. But it seems that when you talk about these aspects, you talk about something new for these people. They are forgetting really where we come from, what we have passed through, our history, our tradition. And this is something very scary. Maybe I'm lucky, and this is something because having the opportunity to travel a lot, to watch with my own eyes the living condition in many countries of the people, I fully understand why they are escaping, why they are leaving, or after a visit in Gaza or a visit in Syria, you fully understand why children cannot live in such condition. But what you have to do is just to try to disseminate, in as much as possible, to make the local community of the country that are hosting refugees to better understand. And on this, the media can play really a huge difference. And I would say that in Europe, in Italy, we have a lot of media that supported the narrative of the NGOs working together with the smugglers. And this is unacceptable.
Tell us more about that.
It's about the fact that there are journalists that are supporting the vision of the political leader and presenting as a fact, talking about pull factor, push factor, using these, manipulating the data, the fact that the presence of the NGO is a favor to the smugglers, and this is something that is unacceptable. While there are many journalists that are doing the job, and now the ones that I mentioned, is living under escort because he worked for the truth and he discovered that there was a deal between the former Italian government and the Libyan Coast Guard and the smugglers.
Incredible. Speaking about media, many journalists here, what do you think that we can do better, improve, or what do we do wrong?
No, I think
in our reporting,
many things that we know about, for example, Libya, about the detention center is thanks to the media, to these brave journalists that made the investigations as in the tradition of the real media. And I really encourage to continue like that. We need truth. We need to speak with the truth. And the journalists can make the difference in dealing with the public opinion, with the civil society at every level. And that the more the journalists are aware and make aware the civil society, the more it's easy to deal with this complexity.
And it has to come
Think about when there was more attention about Syria, how the dynamic of acceptance was an important one. So then when it turned only about the numbers and figures, inclusion, that of course are, then the dynamic has become a bit more complex.
So it has to come from civil society to go up to convince the political leaders, is what you're saying?
Yes.
But what
yes.
if there is unemployment in that country? What if that country is struggling? I'm just trying to play devil's advocate and see those two sides, because
you are fully
it's
right.
a challenge.
You are fully right. And then this is why it is important at the EU level, for example, to talk about shared burden. No? And then what about Lebanon, as a middle-income country, or Jordan, which is a middle-income country? So it's about how we are dealing with this kind of complexity, especially if you come from a wealthy state. This is the interesting part. Look at the Venezuelan crisis. The Venezuelan crisis is affecting middle-income countries. How can you blame Peru, if they change their own migration policies in receiving those who are fleeing Venezuela? Of course, this is another aspect on which, if there is not a shared burden, if there is a failure of the multilateralism, then you have consequences.
I think, my biggest takeaway from what you've been saying is the EU only in name and a spectator. I, from a country where I'm from that wants to leave the EU, it is. It's sad to see.
I don't want to leave the EU, but I think that we have to work to make the EU a reality. This is.
And I want to ask you, there have been media reports saying that we are on the verge of a new refugee crisis. Would you agree, given the situation in Idlib and the rest of northern Syria, and the situation with the Greek camps?
Not big as the previous one. Of course, it will depend about our diplomacy and how the EU and President Erdogan will interact in the next future. What I would say is something quite delicate, but it's something that I truly believe. From me, this is it's to EU, but also to President Erdogan. Please do not treat the migrants and the refugees as a political weapon. This must not happen, and this is extremely important. To respect the human dignity is also about not using them as a political weapon. But of course, there are very complex situations they have to deal, they have to work together to respect the human dignity and to protect the civilians. This is the most delicate part on which EU and Turkey must work together hand in hand. This is for me is crucial and is extremely important.
I just want to ask you, because we're running out of time, I think we might have even gone over time, moral duty. I'm quoting again the European Commission, the new European Commission leader. Moral duty, what would your message be to leaders about their moral duty right now in 2019, given what is happening and given where we are and situation everywhere?
Moral duty should be the political leaders. They should rediscover the real meaning of human dignity and the respect of the human dignity for everyone. This is something that we are missing. When it comes to the basic human rights, you cannot make any distinction of any sort, and this is a moral duty for any political leader. So we are losing any achievement of that we had in the humanitarian sector in the last 160 years through the way our political leaders are behaving. I'm very critical, but this is the sad reality in which we are dealing for. So it's when you cannot enter, or the humanitarian aid is politicized. When the saving life at sea is criminalized, when you are not able to receive aid to support the Venezuelans because they want the collapse of the civil society as a political weapon, but they're forgetting that the children are suffering and the most vulnerable are suffering. This is something really, we are losing our humanity. This is to restore humanity in politics. This is, if you look back in the past, of course, we had difficult times, we have a lot of difficult and complex situations, but we had leaders that never forget the humanity. And now it seems so difficult.
Francesco Rocca, I'm sure everybody here, and on behalf of them, I say we wish you the best of luck for your organization. You're celebrating 100 years. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank
all
you
your
very much.
volunteers. Thank you very much indeed. Grazie mille.